So again, we are doing a menswear draft from Winifred Aldridge's book. A casual shirt draft, and we're going to look at the a menswear block and certain adaptations we do to it. And we are still doing the same construction style, so hip to hip, armhole to armhole. So I'll draw around this. You can be kind of looking through that, look through the diagram there. Okay, that's going to be our first construction. Again, you know, there's just a few simple lines we're going to put on. And notice, again, because it's a Winifred's men's book, she has all these little angled lines, and that is to indicate where you're adding seam allowance and where not. We're going to ignore that because there's no seam allowance in my men's blocks. Okay, so you can kind of just ignore that. We're going to do all our adaptations. We're going to put seam allowance everywhere. And a big F and a big B can be helpful. So again, a bit like the trousers, I do have this shirt here, first of all, sorry. I have this shirt, and it's not exactly like this one, but it has a few similarities, so we just use it as a kind of example. I don't have, obviously, this exact shirt. But this is a casual shirt, so is this. Do you know, it's not a formal shirt, and I think it's around the same fit, and it does have a pocket, so we can kind of use it as a reference point, although our diagram here is what we're diagramming, and it is a little different. So our first thing we would do is look at what we've been given. This is what we're to make. Do we need to adjust the length? If we did, we'd come up the amount we wanted, or we'd come down the amount we wanted. And if we were coming down, we would extend all 3 lines and measure down the amount we want and add. For coming up, we just measure up the amount. Now with men's, they're often quite long because they tuck into trousers often. We'll read through a little bit. We have our diagram. We can see a few things we're going to do. We're going to draw this line on here. We're going to draw a pocket, and we're going to do buttons and buttonholes and markings. And she has then the example of all the pattern pieces there. There's a lot to read, so I'll just skim through it. So the casual shirt. Trace off casual shirt block with the sleeve. The body section is what we're doing. We're going to look at sleeves separately. So body section, draw in finished length. So she does give you that as your first instruction. And then the next instruction is lower neckline. So she's following our system. Like I would say, the first thing you look at is the length. The next thing you look at is generally the top of the garment. All right. On women's wear, it's often like we're looking more at the fit next, because the top of the garment and the fit are kind of joined a lot because of the bust dart. We have to look at them together. So the top of the garment in this case is your necklines. So that's her second instruction. Lower your neckline, because on casual shirts often we take out the neck a little. It's just a little more comfortable. It might only be a small bit on men's, but just make the difference of it being more relaxed fit. And then she says add button stand and mark buttonholes. So that is something that I would do at the beginning. So because the neck, the button stand goes into the neck. If you're starting with the pattern on the top part of the body, you've done your length and you're up at your neck, you're changing your neck, and that goes in. The button stand to me is part of the neck because it goes into the neck. So you have to do your button stand early on. So we'll take a centimetre off the neckline. So whatever we do to the front neck, we do to the back neck. They have to be the same. So take your 1 centimetre off, which is 0.5 for you guys. And that means you have to, you know, put little marks all the way along because it's a curved line. So we've adjusted our neck, and now we're going to do the buttons. Now there's a bit to know about buttons. I did go over it in detail last year. I'm going to do kind of a quicker review, but see what people remember from buttons and button stand and all our terminology. She is using the term button stand. Does anybody remember another term that we use? Button allowance.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can add our allowance for the button or our button stand. And generally speaking, for shirts and things, if you're doing a small button, you'd only add, say, 1 centimetre. If the button gets bigger, you go to 1.5, maybe 2. The buttons on men's shirts typically are smaller than are the really small ones. All right. Once you start to get bigger buttons, it looks more blousey, looks like a woman's blouse. So just to note that on menswear, particularly on a shirt, generally speaking, their buttons are the really small type. And so we might only need, to add 1 centimetre. So button allowance for women, 1 to 2 on shirts. It goes up as you go on to jackets and coats, could be 3 centimetres, because the amount that's left outside of the button depends on how big the button is. So how we determine it is if I have to draw a button on here. So this is a little review for you, right? If I draw my button sits right on the centre front line. So this is our centre front line. And if I draw a button here, if it's small, like 1 centimetre, I only need, to come out a small amount so that the button has a little bit past it. If I have a bigger button, I need to come out further, don't I? Because I still need a little bit more. Okay? If I have a really large button, I need to come out even more. Do you know? So depending on what size of my button, depends on how much I come out. And also, some people leave more space. The bigger the button, often the more there is here. Do you know? So the button sits on the centre front. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to add my 1 centimetre, and I'm going to put it in red. Give me a second. You see, the neck has to come here. This is why I feel like you have to do your button stand with your neck, because the neck has to go all the way through that point, otherwise it's not finished. Now the new lines I've put on are red. Old lines, remember my system is, it's very confusing for you to remember sometimes which one when you go to the next stage of tracing off, so I wiggle through those lines. And that's to symbolise this is gone and we're now on this line here. And then we're going to determine where the placement of the buttons are. So you have to adjust your neck first, because the first button and the position of that is important, and it comes from your neck position, and so you don't want to place your button and then afterwards change your neck. So get your neck position correct, get your amount of button stand correct, and then start with putting the placement of your buttonholes in. So spacing is important. So I'm going to start with one thing first of all. We'll go to spacing next. So there is this way, isn't there? Vertical or horizontal. All right. So why do we choose horizontal in some places and vertical in others? Yeah, it holds more. Okay. When you want it to hold more tension or more force or whatever, you go horizontal. So the top of a trouser, it's going to be this way, because if it's vertical, it can open and the button can kind of get out of the position easier. So at the top of shirts you have the horizontal button, and then often the rest are vertical down because it's a looser, it's not going to just like pop open, so they then change them to vertical lines because they take up less space on the garment and all of that. But horizontal for withstanding more pressure or more force. So cuffs, collars, waistbands, that. And then you can choose to put them horizontal. Maybe if you feel that the blouse is quite fitted. So on ladies or women's wear, the blouse can pop in the middle of the bust sometimes. And if you have a fitted shirt, you might decide, I'm going to make them horizontal just so that it withstands a little more pressure. It's a blouse. But most classic shirts will have the vertical. So that's one thing. Then the spacing, how far apart they are. As Liz was saying, she did a blouse last year and it was 8 centimetres apart they were for women's wear. That's a kind of a good approximate measurement.
For men, is it?
We'd usually go a bit wider for men, so maybe 10. But you can space them how you like as a designer as well. So do you ever see blouses that you know, come like this, and they have, you know, 2 buttons and then 2 buttons, and then, you know what I mean. You have some, you know, room to move in terms of your designing of how you place the buttons, but what you want to know as a designer is the boundaries of function, so you're not making mistakes, and you're informed in your decision. You know this blouse is going to be a little more fiddly to put on, but you know the person, that's fine, it wants that, that's part of it, it's going to be worth it or whatever. Okay, so generally speaking, the spacing is sort of 8 women's or 10 for men's. But you can change that, you know, a little bit, because sometimes a garment ends at a certain place, and it's really funny to, if you space it exactly 10, the button hits right like at the very bottom, or else it's 9.5 centimeters up and there's too much of a space or something. So you could change it then and do 9, or, you know, there's a bit of room to move. The basic thing is around the bottom of the garment, you don't usually have a lot of buttons, particularly on women's wear, past the waist, a little bit past the waist, and then you stop. Because we sit down, and if you have a button, something that's tight, and a garment that's tight enough, and the button is here, when I sit down the button will pop, okay, because my legs come up, and so you can only go down so far past the waist, you know, 10, maybe 15 centimeters, and then after that you don't want buttons there, unless it's a very loose garment. If it's super loose, I have big oversized shirts sometimes I wear, and there's buttons right the way down, because it doesn't matter. So again, it's for you to know when you're designing, okay, this is a big loose garment, my buttons can go further down. Oh no, it's a fitted garment, I have to stop my buttons, you know, here. Because often you see the buttons stop and then there's a big opening, you know, at the bottom of the shirt. That's normal, so you can sit down and you can move around. All right, so that's the boundary of the buttoning, how far down you come. Be the same in men's, you know, it's only so far past the waist, then this whole bit is being tucked in. You don't want to be buttoning, you know, having buttons inside where you have it tucked in your trouser. So they need to sort of stop around there. All right. And then where do they start? So starting the buttons, it depends on whether there's a collar or not, and whether there's a button on the collar or not, and how you want it to sit at the top. So classic shirts might have a, you know, they'd have a button on the collar, say. Okay, so if you have a button on the collar, generally speaking, you start about 4 centimeters down. That helps so the hand can get in and button the next button. Now, not always. Sometimes they're right below it. The super formal shirts have a button there and a button right at the top there too.
4 cms down.
But typically 4 centimeters down, so that you can, you know, you can unbutton your shirt for men's and have just have it a little bit looser at the neck, you know, but you aren't going way down. All right. So it's more conservative on men's in terms of the buttons. All right, because if you look at if you saw a man's shirt unbuttoned to here, that seems normal, but if all of a sudden it was all the way down to here, it would be very strange. you know, so in a work environment here, if you saw somebody and their shirt was down to here, it'd be like normal, but like definitely if it was down to here, it would look strange, you know. Whereas with women's, that's totally fine if you have the lower neck. So these are the boundaries to look at as a designer for men's and women, and it comes right the way down to how you do it, because if you don't know that and you put in all your buttons in the wrong place, you make the whole garment and it looks funny at the end. All right, and you notice straight away if something's off, and it looks, what happens is it starts to look like a blouse, you know, it starts to look like a woman's blouse if you do certain things wrong. So yeah, so we can go now in this one, we can look and we can see there isn't even a button on the collar. It's a relaxed casual shirt, and the button is further down, so we can maybe assume that's about 4 centimeters. So what I'm doing is having a look at this and kind of going, so what I might do is just measure down there really quick and have a visual check of it. So if it's 4 down, does that look right? And then we're going to push our thing there. That actually looks okay. So I'm going to stick with the 4. So that's full scale. So that's 4 down full scale. And that's 2 1/2. Now that's just our first button. And we can see in this diagram, she has them going horizontal, which is a little more unusual, but we're now measuring it from our new line, because essentially this doesn't exist anymore, it's gone, and this is now our top. So we measured 4 down, and we can then come out because it's a horizontal line. Now we're only doing small buttons because it's menswear, so what she does is she draws in, see the way she has it, a line on one side and then going like that. That's to indicate whatever size, depending on the design. So all of hers are like that because these could be used in different ways, these diagrams. But really, you should determine what your button width is and actually fill in the other side, do you know? So it should really be like that if it's a 1 centimeter button. And see, the line actually falls on the center front there, so it's like, you might want to just maybe darken it in or something just to show. So if you want to measure out and put your second line on, it would look like that. Now, so we've got our first position, and then I'm gonna measure down. I'm gonna kind of go like,
10, yeah? So 5.
Well, hold on. What I'm doing is I'm just measuring roughly to just see how they fall, do you know, before I kind of confirm, do you know. So that's what I would do. I would dot them down, and then I would go, oh no, that's falling in a funny place or whatever. I'm going to move it up to 9, or I'm going to go down to 10.5 or something. So that's where I would have stopped, and hers are very similar on the diagram. Okay, so that's fine. So we can do a 10 centimeter spacing between those buttons, which is 5 for you in half scale. So remember, the center of the button sits there. So sometimes people might like to draw the button on, because on the horizontal buttons, the button goes in and then it slides over. So it can be confusing because people think the button sits right there, and it would be off to the side if it did. It needs to sit right on the center front. So it will slide in and sit in a central position there. If you had a bigger, if I did it in an enlarged scale here, when you draw your button on, it kind of makes sense, do you know what I mean? You have your button and your buttonhole. So the button goes in the buttonhole, but then it goes over to that point. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is facing. I think she says it there too. She says add the button stand, mark buttonholes, which is what we've done. Then she says draw in facing line. Now, a facing is a piece of fabric that is sewn to the edge of something to finish something off. This has an actual button band on it. Okay, that's different. I don't have an example actually at the moment of a shirt that comes like she's drawn it, like that, and there is no button stand, there's band, sorry. If I draw the facing in, I think I'll draw it in blue to be different. What you do is you come back about 5 centimeters from the center front line, so not from anything we added past, because we might add way out here. We always need to come back 5 full scale from the center front. And so we come all the way along with my 5. And then what happens here, I don't want to come up and make a funny corner, so I just come out 5 here as well. And I just join this nicely in a kind of curve shape. It's a bit nicer than following that. Okay, so that's my facing. Now you need to shade in facing. So anyone who did facings last year, I would have been asking you to shade them in. The shading, remember, shows that, indicates that something is not on the front of the garment. It's like it's behind, it's shaded, right? It's something that's folded back. So pleats have the shading on them as well. So that will be a piece that we trace off as a separate piece. And her diagram, she does a thing where she's folds it and adds it on, so it could be what you call drawn on or grown on. I find that confuses students so much that this method I found a little easier. So then she says draw in yoke line and back pleat line. So the yoke line is this here. So a yoke is a section that has no darts in it, no fitting or anything in it. It's typically this part on a shirt like either the front or the back of a shirt. You see yokes very commonly, like this one. So we draw in that. It's a style line, so you can choose where you're putting it, but in this case we're trying to imitate what we've been given, and we're trying to look at that and make a good position for that. So I think I would come down about 6 centimeters, because you've got to look and see it's coming across at the back. The way she has it, it comes across at the same level, so it's quite deep at the back. We're going to do the line. So there's a little pleat or down the back of this shirt. And you can see it on the diagram. We're going to draw a line. We are going to have a second construction where we open that piece and let in a bit of space for a pleat. And so we can kind of, again, we can estimate by eye, draw a line there, or we can, so I'd say it's about 10 centimeters in, or 9 or something like that. We'll go about 10 centimeters in. And then we can draw our pocket on here. A couple of things to do for the pocket. Notice that the pocket itself is a little bit below the line, but that the little flap that comes down on top of the pocket is going right into the line. So if you have a flap over a pocket, you need to leave like 1 centimeter so your hand can kind of get in to the flap, you know, under the flap and into the pocket. You could leave, you know, between, you know, maybe 1 or 1.5, maybe even 2, depending on how large the pocket is. I'm going to do it 1.5 below, just to be a little bit more, give it a little more space. So it looks like I came over about 6 centimeters from the center front. Okay, so first I'm starting with a line 1.5 down from this yoke line. And then I'm coming in about 6, but 5 or 6 would be fine, I'd say, coming in. Maybe 5 is slightly better. And then I'm going to make it about 12 centimeters. And then we can draw down and square down here. And we might make it, does it look like a squarish pocket? It looks kind of more like it's longer. So I might go 14 down. If my pocket has been 12 in width, I might go 14 in length then, just to make it be more rectangular. This is 12 in full scale, and this is 14. And this was 1.5 down. Now, we're going to draw in our flap, and notice how it's wider than the pocket. You want to have it wider. I came in here from the center front line, I came in 5. So I'm going to go and make the flap 1 centimeter wider on each side. It might be a little bit bigger than I would do it in real life, but these are kind of, sometimes on your notes you want to make things obvious, you know, you're better have something be on the larger side so you see it's different, you know. And maybe I might make that flap about 5 centimeters deep, or 4 maybe. 5 looks a bit deep. Does it have a curve on it? It does, in which case you have to try and curve the same on each side. So you could take that curve, you know the way you can take a piece of paper, trace your curve, and then flip that over and use your tracing wheel so that you have an identical curve. So 4 down, 14 wide, 1 centimeter out on each side of that. So this is 12 by 14. Yeah. Back, trace off back section along yoke line, insert required amount for pleat. She gives you an example, 6 centimeters. So she's just telling you quickly what to do. And you look at the diagram, so you're taking this section is different. There's going to be a seam there, so you can see it's separated. Then we're going to take this body section here, trace it off, and then cut it, because we don't cut our construction. We trace, and then we cut and spread out for a pleat. We're going to spread 6 centimeters in there. That will be a second construction just for this section. The rest doesn't need a second construction. The rest can just be traced off from here. Okay, so I've traced this section. This is a cutting line, so I have my scissors on it here. When we're adding for a pleat, first of all, a pleat at the back is common in menswear and women's, ladies. There's often extra space because of this kind of thing that happens when we stretch and move. And when we're doing pleats, we first of all decide the position of them. So with a lot of features, what we do is we find where we are putting that feature. We put our line on. Okay, that's the first thing we do. And then if we're adding, in this case, we're adding extra, we're going to cut this and open it out. Now it needs to be open evenly, so one of the better things to do is to draw a line first, and then you know, open out and be sure and place your hem line on that straight line, and then you can measure the amount. So you'll be doing this on another piece of paper. You'll be taking a piece of paper, of course, and sticking these down. Alright, I suppose I can do that. So if I draw a line, that's all right. So I've drawn my line, the hem. I'm going to say for you guys, you glue this down to your new piece of paper, then you measure over 6. And then you place the other side here, matching it along the hem. Now, for those of you who did pleats last year, you remember the marking. I think we did at least one practice of it, but... So there's a particular way you mark pleats. You can see in her diagram, she has them like angled lines. And there's a line down the center, so the line down the center shows where the pleat folds. And then you have diagonal lines. You don't need to worry about the diagonal lines, what angle they're at, or are they exactly matched in terms of spacing. Okay, we don't need to get that particular. You're shading them. It's to let someone know that the fabric is folding back into a pleat. So find the center. Of that pleat, and then draw in diagonal lines. Do your best to keep them evenish and angled even, but don't get too fussed about it, like it's not something to take loads of your attention. Alright, this is our step 2, and then we trace this all off, and then we get our final pattern piece. So that completes the construction really of this, and then basically the big job is to pick out all the different pieces and trace them off. So can you pick out this little piece here? That's the pocket, that might be easy. Trace that off with seam allowance on. This piece here, simple enough, trace it off, seam allowance around. This piece here, the front yoke, okay, be sure you're pulling down along that red line, and this red line that you've added, be sure and add your little button allowance, be sure and add your center front line, and that's your yoke. And then everything under the yoke here, and you actually need to trace off at least little marks where the pocket goes. Either draw the pocket on, or at least draw on little intersections at the 4 corners. So there's I put in a notch here where this pleat line would hit, so if there's any feature like a pleat and it's sewing to something, that something that it's sewing to needs to have a notch. Okay, 4 lines representing your labelling, put your name, you know, you can just call this garment men's shirt or something. And then which piece, this is the back yoke. This can be just called the, you know, the back, you know, body, or the back, even just back, and then back yoke is enough. Fold.
Yeah.
So we're cutting one to the fold in here, and same in the back. That's generally what you do, just to indicate that you mark in your pockets. Okay, and the notches where your pocket flap would go. Don't forget your buttons, all right, your center front line and your pocket positions. Okay, so there's your trace-offs. You have your yoke, your front body section, your front facing, your pocket, and your pocket flap, and then the back pieces. So that will complete it. You need all your labeling on each. You need to check all of your straight grains are on there as well.